now we're going into how to assemble that into broad, repeatable patterns. So if you have an area that has pretty consistent geology type, it has a consistent type of landform. Let's say it's metamorphic rock. It's got mountains. It's got inceptisol soils. It's forested primarily. Take the forest out of it. Let's just keep it strictly abiotic. Y'all know what that word means, right? Abiotic, non-living, versus the biotic, living. So if we're talking about classifying then these broad landscapes into those kinds of abiotic factors, then we can call that physiography. Now, physiography is a term that biologists need to know, ecologists need to know it, but it's seldom, very rarely taught sort of in a biology or geology or ecology class. It tends to be something that, Ken, I'm sure you guys you've heard the term physiography a little bit, right? Yeah, it's real common in the geosciences, especially. So let's get into this. Physiography, a way to define this will be traditionally, physiography is a study of the modern landscape and the evolutionary history which produced it. So it could be the geology and the soil types and all that stuff, along with what produced that landscape. Mountain building produced that landscape. Let's say glaciation might have produced that landscape. There are four major elements to determining the characteristic of a landscape strictly from a physiographic perspective. Say that word with me, physiography. Got it. Okay, what are those sort of four factors? Number one, materials and structure. Exactly what we've been talking about. Rocks and soils and how they're arranged. That is the primary sort of first level determining factor. Secondly, climate. You know, are we in a humid region or a subtropical region or a boreal climate or in an Arctic climate? Okay. What types of processes are there? Both internal as well as external. Tectonic forces, mountain building, earthquake activity, subsidence, the sinking of land over time. Erosional forces, what is the erosion rate for a given landscape? How fast is the surface layer being eroded down over, let's say, 100,000 years or over a period of 1,000,000 years? So all kinds of processes here. And then, of course, time. We need to account for time in the formation of landscapes. And the further in time you go, the more and more change you expect. Now, I read recently, a few years ago, as I was preparing for my PhD, I read a book called, the title's not necessary, but it's basically a book about the landscape evolution of Eastern North America. And it's written in 1999, and it says something to the effect of, pick a place in the United States and North America. And really, this probably applies worldwide. Let me ask somebody to pick up that. Ryan, just name a spot. Where is that? Bristol. Bristol, Tennessee. Great example. The town of Bristol. Imagine you guys are all standing with me in Bristol. This could be anywhere. It could be here in Florida. We're standing in somebody's yard, okay? Ryan, look at that wall over there and paint a picture of what we're looking at from a natural perspective of the surroundings. Imagine we're kind of out in the countryside around Bristol. Looking at that wall, describe it very basically. What do you see? That's in the far distance, right? You're seeing maybe a ridge of mountains. Those mountains are forested. Look at the foreground, down in the valley of Bristol, where Bristol sits in a valley. What does that look like? It's all right. Patch, there's a few trees, there's some open pasture, there's some cornfields, right? The landscape that you see would be recognizable if you were to go back there 3,000 years ago. Would you agree with that? Would you, if somebody dropped you to modern day Bristol and you went there 3,000 years ago, let's say it was your home, would you be able to tell, generally speaking, is your home region based on the look of the land? 3,000 years ago? Now, you'd be able to say, oh, hey, there's that mountain range I used to go hunting on with my granddad, right? Oh, there's the river over here where I used to go fish. About 18,000 years. And again, not so much like, are the houses the same and all that stuff, just the sculpturing of the land. Would the land speak to you as being familiar to you? Maybe, maybe not, right? Probably so. Probably so. 100,000 years ago? Yeah. 750,000 years ago? Yeah. It would look pretty much the same as it does today, with some exceptions of vegetation. Okay, but the mountains would be very identifiable. The streams would probably be identifiable. But what point do you have to go back to before the landscape looks unrecognizable from its modern? Well, there's a fairly general consensus in the world of paleoecology. That's another realm we're going to pull from for our total bowl of cereal, right? Hey, give me some of that geology in here. Give me some of that soils. Give me some of that landforms. What's that paleoecology? All right. We're going to throw some paleoecology in here. We're going to throw a lot of paleoecology. Well, I wish you'd bring it. All right. So what do we mean by that? That means that there's a fairly, I'm not going to say there's consensus, but there's an understanding among paleoecologists that if you reach a point in time, you will go too far for a landscape to be recognizable compared to its modern form. How far back in time? Well, not everybody's in 100% agreement, but generally before the Pliocene, we think that the landscape was so different that it would be unrecognizable to where you would be standing in a modern place. How far back in time is the beginning of the Pliocene? When did the Pliocene begin? Notice I did not say Pleistocene. I did not say Paleocene. That's one of those epochs you need to make sure you're studying and knowing. You need to pull that stuff out. You need to know those years and those dates. Let it roll off the tongue. When was the Pliocene? Right? Who's got Pliocene? Well, let's start at the beginning and go back. Okay, so we're in what epoch right now? Time of man. What is it? Yeah, some people actually say now we're in the time of man screwed shit up, right? Which is the Anthropocene. In which case, we can go back. Does anyone know when that begins? That's not always officially recognized. It may be now.
It's the 1950s. It's on the deposition of nuclear fission products.
There you go. Anthropocene is the 1950s. Okay, when my mama was born, began the Anthropocene. So what then do we go into before that? Holocene. Yeah. And most people, if you said, what are we in today? They'd say we're still in the Holocene, but again, we got the Anthropocene. When did the Holocene begin? How far back in time? Last ice age. At the end of the last ice age, we're going to throw some approximate numbers out. Let's say 12,500 years. That's accurate to within a few hundred years, maybe 1,000. But it's about 12,500. Now, the end of the ice age is the beginning of the Holocene. So then what do we get into if we go to the ice age? That's the Pleistocene. Okay. So from 12,500 roughly back to when is the beginning of the Pleistocene? Roughly 2.6 million years. Some people, argue over the beginning point. Now, this example does not work if you're in Chicago. Why? Because you'd be under ice during many parts of the Pleistocene. So this applies to unglaciated southeastern United States. What's before the Pleistocene? First of all, notice we just go into a new geological period. We have left the Quaternary period, which we're in currently. And we go into what period? Neogene. When I was in school, we learned it as the Tertiary, but I like Neogene. That's the new classification. The last epoch of the Neogene is the Pliocene. So we get pre-ice age is when we're talking about the Pliocene. And roughly when did it begin? Tell us when, Matthew. 5 million years. I would have accepted 6, 4, 5 is a great guess. 5 million years, roughly to 2.6 million years. Some people can bring it forward about 2 or even 1.9, 1.8 million years. That's the Pliocene. So what I'm telling you is sometime in the past 5 million years, you've got to go back to almost anywhere where you know as home and recognize the sculpture of the landscape as home. But you go back pre-Pliocene, so much landscape change happened. You would not be able to recognize the same place today as back then. Well, why not? Well, here's why. Everybody familiar with where the Red River is down here, right? When you're going toward up Wilma Rudolph, across the Red River Bridge. Well, today the Red River is where it is, right? There's a bluff there and all that stuff. But in the Miocene, the Red River wasn't even where it is, right? The Red River was probably 300 feet higher and flowed in a different location, maybe 10 miles to the north. So that's how much change has happened. Things like an entire stream valley was a downcutting of a river system by 300 feet or 200 feet. The erosion of mountains, right? All that stuff, not like the whole erosion of the Appalachians, but the lowering gradually of mountains, the erosion of hills. These are the kinds of things that can happen in the span of a little bit of time. Now, I'm going to put that a different way one quick minute. The entire uplift of mountain ranges like the Sierra Nevadas, for example, is thought to have happened in as little as about 10 million years. Think about that. These giant mountains of California, about 10 million years it took for them to rise to their current position. They're a very young system of mountains. So you can have a lot of change in a little bit of time. Okay, now I want to give you one more of those bits and pieces of information here that I'm not going to require you memorize. I want to tell you about it. Why? Because it's important that you know the history of information, you know where to find it, but I want to focus on sort of a newer, more modern perspective. Physiographic divisions are broken into a classification. So these divisions are grouped into provinces, sections, and subsections. And here's where the larger divisions are. So like Atlantic Coastal Plain Division, Appalachian Highlands Division, and so forth. I want you to focus on the interior highlands right here. That's a division. If we were to look at that and group it at a finer level, below divisions is the physiographic province level, then what you'll notice is that those with the number 14, that's the Ozark Plateau Province, versus number 15, the Ouachita Mountains Province. Now we can further segregate A and B here into sections. Okay, so the Ozark Plateau section, the Boston Mountains section. So that classification is useful for arranging the landscape into areas that are very similar based on geology and soils and climate and time. Go ahead.
What's the logic behind
it? Basically, in this case, keep in mind that everything here, this is all part of that Central Plains division. So they should have numbers that are kind of adjacent to each other, like 11, 12, 13, 14. And then within that, let's say 12s, right? The numbering, the letters there denote lower levels of classification in the hierarchy. Now, I don't really like this anymore. It's not super used by a lot of people, but it was the thing that people used prior to the 1980s. So if you read literature about ecology or whatever, geosciences prior to the 1980s, most people rely on physiographic provinces. If you're in geosciences, you're probably going to emphasize physiography because it's a big deal. If your focus is on rock, soils, climate, and time. But what do most people in this room want to add to that for consideration? What are we mostly trying to figure out in this department? Life, right? Biological factors, ecological factors, right? So we're going to acknowledge that physiographic provinces are very important. And actually, I want you to know these provinces right here. Those that have a red dot are really important for your knowledge. You need to make sure you can identify them. I want you to make sure you can map them. If I put that on an exam, that you know that. In many cases in these PowerPoints, you're going to see places where I'll put a little red dot next to a long list. Those are things you need to make sure you know. Landscapes, landforms, red dots on physiographic provinces. These are so entrenched in the day-to-day lexicon, the day-to-day conversation among conservationists and scientists and people working, that you need to know these terms. Okay. Now, the good news is there's a lot of overlap with where I'm about to show you. Okay. So beginning in the 1980s, some people who work for the U.S. Forest Service, this guy named Omernick, who worked with the Forest Service, began to develop a hybrid sort of classification whereby we take the land, the geology, soils, time, and climate, and we overlay onto that a consideration of ecosystems, tropical rainforest, and grasslands, and tundra, and temperate forests. And when you put all that together, it forms a new concept that has now been very accepted, and this is kind of like the go-to thing. So if you're the National Park Service, you speak in terms of ecoregions. If you're the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you talk about ecoregions. If you're the Bureau of Land Management, you talk about ecoregions. If you're the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service, you speak in ecoregions. But if you're still in geology and geosciences, you still obviously embrace physiographic provinces. Now, ecoregions have 4 levels of classification. Notice, though, that this is, by the way, what we call level 3. Level 3 is very similar to physiographic provinces. So I want you to look at this map. Just kind of hone in on a given region and look at the general similarities if you go back to this map, right? A lot of similarities. Take a look especially at like region number 11 here. Region 11, which is what Middle Tennessee and Central Kentucky consist of. It's probably a better way to put it right there. There's region 11, right? And then here it's region 71. And it's mostly the same, except just a little bit of change, but fairly inconsequential. The biggest thing is that this not only tells us all the information that the physiographic provinces told us about what type of rock is here, and what type of soils, but now the fact that we're using an ecoregion classification tells us a lot more about what the primary ecosystems are that are here, the kinds of suites of species that thrive in this ecoregion. So what do I mean by that? That means if you're in East Central Kentucky near Lexington, chances are that the forest and the grasslands and the birds and the insect diversity are more similar to what you'd see in ecoregion 71 in Nashville or near Huntsville, Alabama, than they would be if you went to Knoxville, Tennessee, or to Memphis, or to Little Rock, right? The ecoregion is a convenient way to group things together based on similarity, this time combining ecosystems as part of the classification. Raise your hand if you've been subjected to ecoregions in your degree program so far. Good. Okay. And did y'all learn that in what class, by the way? Is that what school? Got you. So not here. Kiki? With Dr. Ream? Okay, I would expect that. Brandon?
Dr. Bowman talked to Dr. Ream talked to
In conservation biology. Excellent. Yeah, I would expect that. And that brings up an important point, which is that ecoregions are, especially the finest level, are one of the primary things we use when we start doing landscape scale planning. You know, where do we want to preserve forests across many square kilometers? We look at the ecoregion level. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the 4-tiered classification of ecoregions. Number 1, I want you to know those that are bolded or underlined. So here, For the eastern US, the only one you need to know at the ecoregion 1 level is eastern temperate forest. And here I've got a question for you. What does eastern temperate forest imply about this region? Chase, what do you think? A lot of trees, okay? Forested, less grassland in between. Okay, got it. Anybody want to add anything else to that? Seasonality, spring, summer, fall, winter, right? Temperate climate. Okay, Jacob, anything else? That's what you got. Okay. All right. So know this one, eastern temperate forest. Now, a lot of people will call this region, by the way, not as an ecoregion, but just as a popular way of saying it, the eastern deciduous forest region. Have you ever heard that? Very popular way to kind of phrase it. But these are the eastern temperate forest ecoregion. Now, the second one is we can then begin to structure that eastern temperate forest, which here's the boundaries of it, right? Does not include South Florida, does not include coastal and southern Texas, does not include the Great Plains, and does not include the boreal forest north of central Michigan or Wisconsin, and parts of the Northeast are excluded. We're really just looking at right along here, you know, sort of this region and down is the eastern temperate forest region. Now within that, I want you to know these subdivisions: the Ozark Washita, Appalachian Forest. That's the ones mostly of the mountainous regions. The southeastern plains kind of wraps around here and down here. And then the Mississippi alluvial and southeastern coastal plains, mostly along the Mississippi and along the coast up to here. Okay. Those are your level 2 ecoregions. Let's focus in though at level 3. And this is a very commonly sort of focused aspect of ecoregions. A lot of people use sort of this level. Very few people use 1 and 2 in daily conversation, daily conservation planning. 3 and 4 are the most important ones. So for these, I want you to know all of these. Okay? And then here's the relative sort of grouping for the level 3 classification. Now, don't worry about getting these down. We're going to go through them extensively, and I'm about to give you a visual tour, starting with the Atlantic coast. We're going to go all the way over. Okay. It's going to take us a lecture and a half to get through that. Now, this is the finest level, level 4. This is the one that's most important for conservation planning. And so, as you can see, there are probably several hundred level 4 ecoregions. Let's zoom in here at a very fine level. Some of them are large. Look at how large this one is here, this sort of beige color that's from Atlanta all the way up through parts of central North Carolina. That's a big level 4 ecoregion. But now look at this one. Here's one that's just this little dark green, right on the tops of the highest mountains of the Smokies. Very small, but they're both level 4 ecoregions. So you can have some that are large, some that are small. Here's another one right here. That little patch right there is its own level 4 ecoregion. This little patch right here in dark green, called the Amphibolite Mountains, is its own level 4 region. Okay. All right, now let's get to the meat of the focal area that I want you to focus in on. Now, hear me out. I'm not saying I want you to know everything in this focal area. All right, that's a lot of ecoregions. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in there. But what I am going to hold you to is I want to hold you to most of those. Particularly, we're going to do a line. We're going to do a transect, a big mega transect project. Okay, we're going to go from Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, on a tour all the way across to the western edge of the Mississippi alluvial plain, within sight, the very base of the Ozark Mountains. What we're going to do along the way, we're not going to talk much about this. This we're going to just hit the highlights. But when we get to the edge of the Blue Ridge, we're going to focus on this region right here. The entire rest of the class, this begins the jumping off point for the entire rest of the class. You want to know about the forest? We're going to talk about the forest of this region. You want to know about grasslands of that region, wetlands of that region, biodiversity of this region, geology, soils of this region, settlement history, Native American patterns. We're going to talk about all that with regard to this region, and that's the topic of this class, natural history of the Mid-South. Okay. All right. So let's start over on by the way, the first time I taught this class, I told you we went 4,000 miles in 15 days. You remember that? I told you about that? Okay. So we started here. In the first 5 days, we drove to Little Rock. And then we spent all this time just here, went up to there, went down to here, over there. Whew, into 5 days. Let's go home. Take a break, the weekend. And at the end of this long weekend, all right, guys, y'all meet Monday morning, 7 o'clock. Sure, 7 o'clock, Josh? Yeah, 7 o'clock. Here we go. 5 more days. We go here, working way down, here, dipping out down slightly. Day 3, day 4, day 5. Oh my God, I'm exhausted. Let's go home. Go back. And then we took a weekend break. And then it was on the, I don't know, technically the 11th day of class, I guess. The first day of the 3rd week. We start out at 7 o'clock. People are pretty high spirits. They've enjoyed their break, but they really are exhausted. And we drive over to Crossville, and we get out. We're ready to have fun, right? We're ready to do all this, and our end goal is here, Linville Gorge, North Carolina. On that first day of that 3rd week, we stop in Crossville at a pilot station, and that's when all hell broke loose. And you've never seen a bigger fight erupt in all your life. I won't say who it was between. Let's just say that we told one of the students, get your ass in the van, taking you back to Clarksville and dropping you out. We kicked you out of the class. So here we go. Get out. And then we went back. And then we began. Boom. 4,000 miles, 15 days. I've never taught that class in that same way again. It was fun. We visited 87 sites, life-changing experience. We went to the Smoky Mountains. We went to the Mississippi River sandbars. We visited prairies and old-growth forests. We saw rare birds and rare animals and rare plants. And I exhausted myself the first time out of the gate. And I've never had the fortitude to go back and teach it that way. Maybe one day. So what I'm going to do for you, my friends, is give you the visual tour instead. We're going to take a trip from the Atlantic coast west. And with that, in our next 20 minutes, we're going to get started and see how far we get. All right. First of all, it's important to first recognize this big region right here, up until this line. From there to the coast, it's called the coastal plain, right? This is defined as a plain extending inland from the seashore, commonly the result of geologically recent emergence of land. Okay, so relatively new land, geologically recent. Somebody tell me real quick if you can. When was the last time, if the current seashore is here, right? When was the last time the edge of the ocean was there? How far back in time do we have to go? Anybody? Why don't we play a guessing game? Brandon? Couple million. Ian? 10 million. 20? 2 million. 30 million. 5 million. 7. 9. 10. 15. 12. 2. 27. Who said the oldest number? Let's see, what'd you say? 30. You're the closest. But you're still only less than halfway there. 65.5 million years. So geologically recent, my friends, doesn't always mean 2, 5, 10 million years. Geologic recency is, in this case, all the way back to the extinction of the dinosaurs. That's how far back we can go to where we look at the origins of this entire landscape. That's still very old, right? But it's recent in the span of the Earth being 10 billion years old, right? Okay, geologic recency, coastal plain. Now, one other thing about that is that line, by the way, goes on around and comes up into Tennessee and land between the lakes. And we'll talk about that later. That line goes all the way around. We call it the fall line. Now, the soils of the coastal plain are a mixture of what you would generally expect. A lot of sand. Think about the coastal beaches and stuff. But there's also other kinds of sedimentary rocks that have been laid down that have formed over the past tens of millions of years, like sandstone, limestone, chalk. There's all that too. And then there's even more recent deposits like silts of floodplains. We'll cover all that. So if we're starting on the edge of the coast at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, you've got some wonderful sand beaches and sand dune grasslands, for example. We come back in the more protected waters. You don't have to take any notes on this. This is just solely visual at this point. This is these beautiful, extensive salt marshes like you'd see out along the estuaries that lead from the rivers to into the coast or into the bays. Some of the oldest trees, in fact, the oldest stand of trees in eastern North America is right here. This is in some of the swamps of eastern North Carolina. Some of these bald cypress trees are older than 3,000 years old. And exquisite treed grasslands, my favorite. Oh, isn't that an oxymoron, Dr. I'll tell you what's a moron, buddy. Don't you argue with me on what a grassland is. If I tell you a grassland can have trees in it, buddy, you better listen. Right? Why, Dr. Estes? Why is that a grassland with trees? How many species of trees do you see in this scene? One. It's a very important tree. In fact, don't let your eyes deceive you. Those are old growth trees. Those are virgin trees. This is all longleaf pine. But do you know that in a single square meter, right here, in that space on the ground, we put a square meter plot down, boom, we lay it right here. We might have one tree species in the plot. But how many other species are in the square meter plot? Now, I'll give you a hint. More than anywhere else in North America, north of Costa Rica. More species in that 1 square meter than anywhere else, plant-wise. How many? 13? 80. It's high, buddy. It's high. It's almost a global record. Juliet? 50. You're close. 52. The global record from the mountains of Argentina, from a grassland in the Andes, is 89 species in a square meter. So not bad, right? 52 species in a square meter, and all of them are grassland species. Many of them are conservative, meaning they have to have specialized conditions. There's so much light filtering through those pine needles that it's still a very high light environment. It just has a lot of trees on it. So this is what we call a pine savanna. Rolling inland, coming on in toward central North Carolina, we have, again, really sandy soil. This is an area called the Sand Hills of North Carolina. Beautiful, rolling, sort of grassy landscapes with scattered trees. And then at that point, we have reached this critical line here that separates the coastal plain boundary from the next boundary to the inside. Now, I'm just going to introduce it today because it's a little bit east of where our focus is. Who knows what this big region right here is called? Of course, it's there. Piedmont. What's that line called that separates the Piedmont from the coastal plain? Fall line. Remember we said it? All right. What is a Piedmont? A Piedmont is an area at the base of a mountain or mountain range. The word Piedmont comes from the Italian words pied and monte, which means foot and hill. Okay. So the Piedmont is sort of like a low, gently hilly region at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, between the Blue Ridge and the coastal plain. Okay.
Is it the Piedmont or a?
Well, it can be used as both. In this case, it's a proper noun, the Piedmont. If you talk to people in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Durham, Chapel Hill, they say, I live in the Piedmont. If you talk to people in Clarksville, they say, I live in the Pennyroyal or the Pennyrile or on the Highland Rim. It's a proper noun in this case. But yes, you can have a Piedmont as well. It's a geologic term. So the fall line is this term we say that divides the Piedmont in this case from the coastal plain. And what you'll notice is that all these rivers begin to drop down, right? You'll see that there's rapids here. And importantly, the coastal plain mostly has unconsolidated sediments like sand and silt and gravel and stuff like that. The Piedmont, on the other hand, has the oldest rocks around the southeast. 1 billion year old rocks, easy and greater. The oldest rocks in the southeast are in the Piedmont. And so what's happening is those rivers are flowing across a rocky sort of upland surface, not mountainous, right? Just kind of hilly. And then they begin to cut down and go into this flat coastal plain where they're swampy, like with those ancient bald cypress trees, right? Now, as America was beginning to be settled by Europeans, there's a strange sort of phenomenon that we were beginning to see. Notice then the string of cities, right? Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, Columbus, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, Augusta, Columbia, South Carolina, Spartanburg, South Carolina. That's actually not Spartanburg, that's another one. I think it's Greensboro. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia. We got Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia. All those cities, Wilmington, Delaware, all of them lined up at the fall line. Why? Trade? Well, it was difficult for them to go much farther above because of the rapids. Like in the 1600s, you were traveling mainly by water or over land. But more importantly than that, why did cities develop around the fall line? Not so much timber. It has to do with the rivers that are coming down. These rivers dropping in elevation. What about that?
Using mills.
Ah, good job, Laura. Mills. So when they had to crush corn, they used it with water power, right? They built grist mills. And you would build those mills on places where the water levels were naturally dropping in elevation from high to low. So all along these places, the first mills for milling agricultural products like corn and other types of products began to develop along the fall line cities. And our southern cities largely cropped up there. These were the centers of commerce in the 1710s and 1730s, 1750s, decades before the American Revolution. All of that then is explained by a geological and landscape phenomenon called the fall line. Now, this is a bit of a dramatization. It's not such a precipitous cliff-like drop, but this is just showing generally the nature of how these rivers come down and then cascade over that fall line into the coastal plain, okay? As they do, they're carrying with it all the bed loads of sediments, the sands and the gravels and all that stuff into the ocean. Remember when we talked about, and we're going to talk about again, what happened to all the Jurassic and Triassic sediments? It's carried into the ocean and built up part of the continental shelf. Remember, below Mobile Bay, 4 miles deep. All that's going to come back into play shortly. So the Piedmont is this kind of rolling, hilly landscape. Jody Morgan, who's on the call, lives in the Piedmont. She's down in the northern suburbs of Atlanta. So it's that rolling kind of landscape. It's almost like a plain, but it's got scattered hills. But get this, the highest mountains in the United States and North America used to be here. What we're looking at now with those very old billion-year-old rocks around Atlanta and around Spartanburg, South Carolina, they're the roots of mountains that were once the size of the Himalayas. We're looking at the very base of the greatest mountain range that once existed in the past 500 million years in North America. They were easily over 20,000 feet tall, and they have been eroded down to the nub. All that we have left are the foothills along the western edge of the Piedmont, which is the modern-day Blue Ridge Mountains. But the big mountains were where the Piedmont is today.
So I can understand being able to look at the
Mm-hmm.
tell things.
Yeah.
How do you tell how big the mountain was this?
That, my friend, you got to wait, because that's going to be the subject of our next 2.5 weeks of lecture. Deep paleoecology. We're going to reach way back to the Gondwanan period, 2 billion years in time, and come forward. Because what I want to do after I teach you about what the land looks like today, from the coast to the Ozarks, then, my friends, we have the fun part. We look at how it was all built. How was the land built? So this land you're looking at right here used to be an island called Avalonia in the Atlantic Ocean, in the ancestor of the Atlantic. And this used to not even be part of North America. It was pushed against North America and sort of fused with the North American continent. So this is almost like a little subcontinent, sort of like Madagascar is. That's completely separate geologically from the rest of North America. And we'll talk about that. So what does the Piedmont look like today from a landscape perspective? Well, if you read most of the modern literature, they say that the Piedmont was wooded. It was forested. In places, there was enough light reaching the floor that there could be grasses on the bottom. But most people would say it was forested. Now, I'm going to overturn some of those notions, and we're going to look in as to why parts of the Piedmont were grasslands with beautifully diverse grasslands that supported species unique to the Piedmont region, like the smooth purple coneflower here, which is unique to that area. The Piedmont also is home to a variety of types of very specialized, uncommon rocks. This is a place called Kennesaw National Battlefield on the northwest suburbs of Georgia. These are rare types of outcrops here of metamorphic rock. In the distance, you can see some of the rock outcrops in the city of Atlanta, like Stone Mountain and Arabia Mountain. And these kind of dome-like outcrops, and that's what they're called. They're called domes. And sometimes they're also called plutons, Plutons. We'll come back and touch on plutons later. But notice it's mostly a plain with a little bit of hilly topography, and every once in a while, you'll see the roots of an ancient mountain. That's what that is. That pluton is kind of the base of an ancient mountain. Now, on the far western edge of the Piedmont, when you get into North Carolina and you're driving west on I-40 toward Tennessee, long before you reach the exit for Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you begin to reach what the early settlers called the Blue Mountains. They talked about, you could see them far in the distance. They described them as blue. You could see that. That's the Blue Ridge. And because of that sort of hazy coloration where they appeared to be blue on the distant horizon, they early on in the 1600s at least, they developed the name the Blue Ridge. This is the easternmost edge of that other ecoregion we're about to go into. So we're going to leave the Piedmont right here in the foreground, going into the Blue Ridge. This is a wonderfully diverse area. Lots of outcrops and types of dry forest, of pine and oak. Lots of very unique geologies, mafic rock and ultramafic. And with that, in just 3 minutes to spare, we're going to stop. And what I'm going to do then is we're going to begin next lecture with really the first region that you need to be responsible for, okay? I gave that little introduction from the coast to the Piedmont, just to kind of prepare you. But next time we're going to talk about the Blue Ridge, and we're going to classify it and look at all these types. We're going to relate that back to, let's say, for example, the Southern Sedimentary Mountains. What do you think you're going to need to know about that region? Rocks, right? We're going to relate that back to things like schist and phyllite and slate, okay? We're not going to spend a lot of time on geology. We're just going to hit it briefly because we've already kind of covered it in some detail. And then we're going to start rolling through the rest of the state. It's probably going to take us all of next lecture, maybe a little bit of the one after, to get all the way into Arkansas. And when we do, that's when we'll start looking at how all this was put together in the evolution of the American landscape.